Handsome millionaire took a homeless woman to his ex-fiancée's wedding, and what she did shocked everyone. Hello and welcome to 80s Love Stories, where I, your favorite narrator, Christopher, bring you an exciting love story straight from the unforgettable 1980s. Get ready for a journey full of nostalgia and incredible twists. Today's story is truly remarkable, with an ending that's sure to touch your heart and leave you amazed. So, stay with me until the very last moment. I hope this experience is unforgettable for you, and may God bless you and your family. Now, let's get started. The rain fell mercilessly on the city streets that evening, turning every corner into a mirror of despair. Theodore Blackwell sat behind the wheel of his luxury car, staring at the golden wedding invitation that had arrived that morning. Victoria Sterling was getting married, and somehow she had found it necessary to invite him to witness her happiness with another man. Theodore's fingers tightened around the steering wheel as memories flooded back. Victoria had been everything to him. Once, beautiful, sophisticated, and seemingly perfect, they had been engaged for 2 years, planning a life together in the upper echelons of society. But then came that terrible night when he discovered her true nature, when the mask of perfection slipped away to reveal someone he no longer recognized. As he drove through the upscale district where the wedding would take place tomorrow, Theodore's eyes caught sight of a figure huddled beneath a bus stop. The woman was soaked to the bone, her long dark hair plastered against her face, clutching a worn coat around her thin frame. Something about her posture, the way she held herself despite her circumstances, made him slow the car. Diana Martinez had once been a successful architect, designing beautiful homes for families across the city. Her life had been filled with purpose and joy, until a series of devastating events stripped everything away from her. First came the illness that drained her savings, then the economic downturn that cost her job, and finally, the betrayal by those she trusted most, leaving her with nothing but the clothes on her back. Now, as she sat in the cold rain, Diana tried to remember what warmth felt like. She had spent months on the streets, learning to navigate a world she never imagined she would inhabit. Despite everything, she maintained a dignity that no circumstance could steal from her. Her eyes still held the spark of intelligence that had once impressed clients and colleagues alike. Theodore found himself pulling over, an impulse he couldn't quite explain driving his actions. As he approached the bus stop, Diana looked up, revealing a face that was undeniably beautiful despite the hardships etched in her features. Her eyes were a striking green, filled with a mixture of wariness and grace that caught him off guard. "Excuse me," Theodore said, his voice gentler than he had intended. "You're soaking wet. Can I offer you a ride?" "Somewhere?" Diana studied him carefully. She had learned to read people quickly on the streets, to distinguish between genuine kindness and hidden motives. This man was clearly wealthy. His expensive suit and confident posture spoke of privilege, but there was something in his eyes that seemed sincere. "I don't have anywhere specific to go," Diana replied honestly, her voice carrying the refined tone that betrayed her educated background. "But thank you for the offer." Theodore was struck by her honesty and the way she spoke. This wasn't what he had expected. "What's your name?" he asked, stepping closer despite the rain. "Diana," she answered simply, not offering her surname. On the streets, full names were luxuries one couldn't afford. "I'm Theodore," he replied, "and I have a proposition for you, Diana. It might sound strange, but I need your help." Diana tilted her head, intrigued despite herself. What kind of help? Theodore took a deep breath, realizing how absurd his idea might sound. "Tomorrow I have to attend my ex-fiancée's wedding. It's complicated. I need someone to accompany me, someone who won't judge me or ask too many questions. In return, I can offer you a warm meal, clean clothes, and a safe place to stay for as long as you need." The silence stretched between them as Diana processed his words. She had encountered many offers during her time on the streets, most of them carrying hidden prices she wasn't willing to pay. But something about Theodore seemed different. There was a vulnerability in his request that matched her own desperate situation. "Why me?" Diana asked, pulling her coat tighter around herself. "Because," Theodore said, surprising himself with his honesty, "you look like someone who understands what it means to have everything and lose it all. And right now, I need to be reminded that there's still authenticity in this world." Diana considered his words carefully. The rain was getting heavier, and the prospect of a warm, dry place was more appealing than her pride would normally allow. But beyond the immediate comfort, something in Theodore's manner suggested this might be more than a simple transaction. "What would you expect from me at this wedding?" she asked. "Just be yourself," Theodore replied. "That's all I need. Someone real in a room full of people wearing masks." After a long moment, Diana nodded. "All right, Theodore, I'll help you." As they walked toward his car, Theodore couldn't help but wonder what he was getting himself into. He had acted on pure instinct, driven by a desire to do something unpredictable for once in his carefully orchestrated life. Diana, meanwhile, felt a mix of apprehension and curiosity about this unexpected turn of events. The drive to Theodore's penthouse was filled with comfortable silence. Diana watched the city lights blur past the windows, marveling at how quickly her circumstances could change. Just hours ago, she had been preparing to spend another cold night on the streets. Now she was riding in luxury toward an unknown future. Theodore's apartment was everything Diana had expected from a successful businessman, sleek, modern, and impeccably decorated. But what surprised her were the small personal touches that revealed the man beneath the wealth. Books of poetry on the nightstand, a half-finished painting on an easel, and photographs that spoke of genuine relationships rather than mere social connections. "You can use the guest room," Theodore said, showing her to a beautifully appointed space. "There are clothes in the closet that should fit you. They belonged to my sister before she moved overseas. Take whatever you need." As Diana explored the room that would be her sanctuary, she found herself wondering about the story behind Theodore's request. What had happened between him and this Victoria that made attending her wedding so important yet so difficult? That night, as Diana soaked in her first hot bath in months, she reflected on the strange turn her life had taken. She had learned not to question good fortune too closely, but something about Theodore intrigued her beyond the obvious relief his offer provided. Meanwhile, Theodore sat in his study, staring at the wedding invitation and questioning his sanity. What had possessed him to invite a stranger, a homeless stranger no less, to such an important social event? Yet something about Diana's quiet dignity had resonated with him in a way he couldn't ignore. The next morning, Theodore was amazed by the transformation. Diana emerged from the guest room wearing an elegant navy dress that complemented her natural beauty perfectly. Her hair, clean and styled, fell in soft waves around her shoulders, and her green eyes sparkled with renewed confidence. "You look," Theodore began, then stopped, realizing that any compliment would sound inadequate. "Different," Diana supplied with a slight smile. "Clean clothes and a good night's sleep can work wonders." But it was more than that, and they both knew it. There was something about Diana that transcended her circumstances, a natural grace and intelligence that no amount of hardship could diminish. As they prepared to leave for the wedding, Theodore felt an unexpected nervousness. This wasn't just about facing Victoria anymore. It was about introducing Diana to a world that might judge her harshly if they knew her recent history. "Are you ready for this?" he asked, adjusting his tie in the mirror. Diana looked at him with steady eyes. "The question is, are you ready? After all, I'm just along for the ride." Her response made Theodore smile for the first time in weeks. There was something refreshing about her directness, her lack of pretense. In a world where everyone seemed to be performing a role, Diana's authenticity was like a breath of fresh air. The wedding venue was everything Theodore had expected from Victoria: opulent, over the top, and designed to impress rather than inspire. Crystal chandeliers cast rainbows across marble floors, and elaborate floral arrangements filled every corner with overwhelming fragrance. As they entered the reception hall, Theodore felt the familiar weight of society's expectations settling on his shoulders. He was about to introduce Diana to this world of judgment and superficiality, and suddenly he worried he had made a terrible mistake. But Diana seemed unfazed by the grandeur around them. She moved with quiet confidence, observing the elaborate displays with the trained eye of someone who had once designed beautiful spaces herself. Her presence beside Theodore felt natural, as if she belonged there despite the vast differences in their current circumstances. The first test came quickly. Victoria's mother, Mrs. Sterling, approached them with the practiced smile of someone accustomed to social warfare. "Theodore, darling," she gushed, her eyes immediately shifting to Diana with thinly veiled curiosity. "How wonderful that you could make it. And who is this lovely creature?" Theodore felt his jaw tighten, but before he could respond, Diana stepped forward with a grace that would have impressed royalty. "I'm Diana," she said simply, extending her hand with perfect poise. "Thank you for including me in such a beautiful celebration." Mrs. Sterling shook Diana's hand, clearly trying to place her within the social hierarchy she knew so well. "Delighted to meet you, dear. And what is it that you do?" It was a loaded question in this crowd. Profession and family connections were the currency of acceptance. Theodore held his breath, suddenly realizing how cruel this world could be to someone in Diana's situation. Diana paused for just a moment, then smiled with genuine warmth. "I help people find their way home," she said, her words carrying a truth that transcended any specific career description. The ambiguity of her response left Mrs. Sterling momentarily speechless, unable to categorize or dismiss Diana as easily as she had planned. Theodore felt a surge of admiration for the way Diana had handled the interrogation with such dignity and wit. As they moved through the crowd, Theodore began to see his former world through Diana's eyes. The conversations were shallow, focused on material possessions and social status, rather than anything meaningful. The laughter felt forced, the compliments calculated, yet Diana navigated it all with a quiet grace that made others take notice. Then came the moment Theodore had been dreading. Victoria herself approached, radiant in her wedding gown, and clearly curious about his unexpected companion. She was undeniably beautiful, with perfectly styled blonde hair and features that belonged in a magazine. But as she drew closer, Theodore remembered why their relationship had ended. "Theodore," Victoria said, her voice carrying the sultry tone that had once captivated him. "I'm so glad you came. And who is this enchanting woman?" The way Victoria looked at Diana wasn't unkind, but there was a calculating quality to her gaze that made Theodore uncomfortable. He had seen that look before, Victoria sizing up potential competition or threats to her carefully constructed world. "This is Diana," Theodore said, his voice steady despite the tension he felt. Victoria extended her hand to Diana with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "How wonderful to meet you. I don't believe I know you from the usual circles. Where did you and Theodore meet?" It was a trap, disguised as polite conversation. Victoria was fishing for information that would allow her to place Diana in some comfortable category, or failing that, to diminish her somehow. Diana met Victoria's gaze directly, unintimidated by the bride's obvious beauty or social position. "We met during a storm," she said, her words carrying layers of meaning that only she and Theodore understood. "Sometimes the most meaningful encounters happen when we least expect them." Victoria's smile faltered slightly, sensing that she wasn't getting the reaction she had anticipated. There was something about Diana that she couldn't quite grasp or control, and it clearly bothered her. "How poetic," Victoria said, her tone slightly cooler now. "Well, I do hope you enjoy the celebration. The champagne is imported from France and the orchestra is simply divine." As Victoria moved away to greet other guests, Theodore felt a mixture of pride and protectiveness toward Diana. She had handled the encounter with more grace than he could have managed himself. "You were amazing," he whispered to Diana as they found seats for the ceremony. Diana shrugged slightly. "I've learned that authenticity is the best defense against artifice." She couldn't attack what she couldn't understand. As the ceremony began, Theodore found himself studying Diana's profile as she watched the proceedings. There was something peaceful about her presence, a centeredness that he envied. Despite everything she had endured, she seemed more at peace with herself than anyone else in that opulent room. The wedding ceremony was elaborate and expensive, but Theodore couldn't help noticing how cold it felt compared to the warmth radiating from the woman beside him. Victoria and her new husband exchanged vows that sounded rehearsed rather than heartfelt, and the whole affair felt more like a performance than a celebration of love. When it came time for the reception, Theodore and Diana found themselves seated at a table with some of his former business associates. The conversation quickly turned to the usual topics: stock portfolios, vacation homes, and expensive acquisitions. Diana listened politely, occasionally asking questions that revealed both her intelligence and her different perspective on life. "So, Diana," one of the men said during a lull in conversation, "what line of work are you in?" Theodore tensed, knowing this was exactly the kind of question that could expose Diana's situation to this unforgiving crowd. But Diana smiled calmly. "I'm between projects at the moment," she said truthfully. "Sometimes life requires us to pause and reassess before moving forward. I find it's during these quiet periods that we often discover what truly matters." Her answer was both honest and diplomatic, revealing nothing while saying everything. Theodore marveled at her ability to navigate these social waters with such skill. As the evening progressed, something unexpected began to happen. People were drawn to Diana's quiet confidence and genuine warmth. Unlike the other guests who seemed to be performing their roles in some elaborate social drama, Diana was simply herself, authentic, thoughtful, and kind. Theodore watched in amazement as hardened business executives found themselves sharing personal stories with Diana, and social butterflies, who normally spoke only in superficial pleasantries, opened up about their real concerns and dreams. She had a gift for making people feel heard and valued, something that was clearly rare in this environment. The turning point came during the dancing. Theodore had expected to sit out most of the evening, uncomfortable with the pretense of celebration, but when the orchestra struck up a waltz, he found himself asking Diana to dance. As they moved together on the dance floor, Theodore was struck by how natural it felt. Diana moved with unconscious grace, following his lead, while somehow making the dance feel like a collaboration rather than a performance. Around them, other couples seemed to be putting on a show for the watching crowd, but Theodore and Diana were lost in their own world. "Thank you," Theodore said quietly, as they swayed to the music. "For what?" Diana asked, looking up at him with those remarkable green eyes. "For reminding me what real looks like," he replied. As the song ended and they prepared to return to their table, neither of them noticed Victoria watching from across the room, her expression unreadable as she observed the obvious connection between her ex-fiancé and his mysterious companion. The evening was far from over, and the real surprises were yet to come. The evening took an unexpected turn when Victoria's new husband, Richard Pemberton, approached their table during the dinner service. He was a tall, distinguished man with silver temples and the kind of confident bearing that came from old money and social position. But there was something in his eyes that made Theodore instantly wary. "Theodore, my friend," Richard said with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, "I hope you don't mind me stealing a moment with your lovely companion." Before Theodore could respond, Richard had extended his hand to Diana. "Would you honor me with a dance, beautiful lady? I find myself curious about the woman who has captured the attention of every person in this room." Diana glanced at Theodore, who gave her an almost imperceptible nod. She accepted Richard's hand gracefully, and as they moved toward the dance floor, Theodore couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than a simple social gesture. "You know," Richard said as they began, "to waltz. I have an excellent memory for faces. Architecture was always a hobby of mine, and I remember a brilliant young woman who designed the most exquisite homes in the city. Diana Martinez, wasn't it?" Diana's steps faltered for just a moment, but she quickly recovered her composure. "That was a long time ago," she said quietly. "Indeed it was," Richard continued, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "I also remember reading about the scandal that destroyed her career. Something about embezzled funds and fraudulent contracts. Such a shame when talent gets corrupted by greed." Diana's face remained serene, but Theodore, watching from across the room, noticed the subtle tension in her shoulders. Something was wrong, though he couldn't hear their conversation over the music and chatter. "You're mistaken," Diana said firmly. "Those charges were false, and they were dropped." Richard's smile widened, but it was cold and calculating. "Oh, I know they were. Dropped? Lack of evidence, wasn't it? But we both know how these things work in high society. The whispers never really stop, do they? Once trust is broken—" "What do you want?" Diana asked directly, tired of the verbal sparring. "Nothing much," Richard replied, spinning her gracefully as the music swelled. "Just thought you should know that I recognize you, and that perhaps it would be uncomfortable if others were to remember as well, particularly given your current circumstances." Diana understood the threat immediately. Richard was giving her a choice: disappear quietly or risk having her past exposed to this crowd of influential people who would judge her harshly based on old rumors and false accusations. "You don't know me at all," Diana said, her voice steady despite the turmoil she felt inside, "and you certainly don't know what I've survived." As the dance ended, Richard leaned close to her ear. "Think about what's best for everyone, my dear, including Theodore. He's a good man who doesn't deserve to be associated with controversy. Diana returned to the table with her composure intact, but Theodore immediately sensed the change in her demeanor. The lightness that had characterized her throughout the evening had been replaced by a quiet tension. "What did he say to you?" Theodore asked as soon as she sat down. "Nothing important," Diana replied, but her voice lacked its earlier warmth. "Just small talk." Theodore wasn't convinced, but before he could press further, the evening's entertainment began. Victoria had arranged for a series of toasts and speeches that would celebrate her new marriage while subtly showcasing the social connections and wealth of the assembled guests. As various friends and family members took turns at the microphone, Diana found herself thinking about Richard's words. She had worked so hard to put that chapter of her life behind her, but the wounds were still fresh. The accusations had been false. She had been framed by a business partner who had embezzled funds and used her designs to cover his tracks. Though the charges were eventually dropped, the damage to her reputation had been irreversible. The stress and legal battles had taken their toll on her health and finances. Medical bills from a nervous breakdown, combined with the inability to find work in her field, had started the downward spiral that eventually led to the streets. But she had survived, and she had learned to find strength in places she never knew existed. Now sitting in this opulent ballroom, Diana realized that her past was catching up with her in ways she hadn't anticipated. Richard's threat hung over her like a sword, and she found herself considering whether she should simply disappear to protect Theodore from any association with her tainted reputation. Theodore, meanwhile, was growing increasingly concerned about Diana's sudden change in mood. He had watched her handle every social challenge of the evening with grace and confidence, but something about her conversation with Richard had shaken her in a way that all of Victoria's subtle barbs had not. When Victoria herself took the microphone for her thank you speech, the room fell silent with anticipation. She looked radiant in her wedding gown, every inch the perfect society bride, but Theodore found himself comparing her polished beauty to Diana's natural authenticity. "I want to thank everyone for being here to celebrate this wonderful day," Victoria began, her voice carrying easily through the room. "Marriage is about finding your perfect match, someone who shares your values and your vision for the future." Her eyes found Theodore in the crowd, and for a moment he could swear she was speaking directly to him. "I'm so grateful to have found my soulmate in Richard, a man who understands the importance of social responsibility and maintaining the standards that make our community strong." The emphasis on standards felt pointed, and Theodore noticed Diana stiffen beside him. Victoria continued her speech, but her words seemed to carry double meanings that made Theodore increasingly uncomfortable. "We all know how important it is to choose our associations carefully," Victoria said, her gaze sweeping the room before landing briefly on Diana. "The people we surround ourselves with reflect who we are and what we value. I'm blessed to be surrounded by friends and family who share my commitment to integrity and excellence." The applause that followed felt hollow to Theodore, and he found himself questioning whether he had ever really known Victoria at all. The woman he had once planned to marry seemed capable of cruelties he had never imagined. As the formal program concluded and guests began to mingle again, Theodore noticed Diana excusing herself. She headed toward the ladies' room, and he could see the strain she was trying so hard to hide. Concerned, Theodore waited a few minutes before approaching one of the female guests he trusted, Sarah, an old family friend who had always been kind and discreet. "Sarah, could you check on Diana? She seemed upset after dancing with Richard, and I'm worried about her." Sarah nodded and made her way toward the ladies' room. What she found there broke her heart. Diana was standing at the mirror, not primping or touching up her makeup, but simply staring at her, reflection with tears threatening to fall. "Are you all right, dear?" Sarah asked gently. Diana turned, quickly composing herself. "Yes, I'm fine, just needed a moment." But Sarah had raised daughters of her own and recognized the look of someone fighting to maintain their dignity in the face of cruelty. "Whatever someone said to you tonight, don't let them win by believing it." Diana managed a small smile. "Thank you. That's very kind. Theodore is worried about you," Sarah continued. "He's a good man, you know, one of the best. And the way he looks at you, well, I haven't seen him this happy in years." These words hit Diana harder than any of Richard's threats. The thought that her presence might bring shame or difficulty to Theodore was more painful than any personal attack on her character. When Diana returned to the ballroom, she found Theodore waiting for her with obvious concern. "Are you okay? You've seemed different since you danced with Richard." Diana looked at this kind, generous man who had shown her such unexpected compassion, and she made a decision that she hoped would protect him from any fallout from her past. "Theodore, I think I should go," she said quietly. "This was wonderful, but I don't belong here. These people, this world, it's not mine." "What did Richard say to you?" Theodore demanded, his voice carrying an edge of anger she hadn't heard before. "It doesn't matter," Diana replied. "What matters is that I don't want to cause problems for you. You've been so kind, and I don't want to repay that kindness by creating awkward situations." Theodore studied her face, recognizing the signs of someone who had been wounded and was trying to retreat to safety. "Diana, whatever he threatened you with, we can face it together. You don't have to run." Before Diana could respond, Victoria appeared beside them, having obviously overheard part of their conversation. "Oh, leaving so early," she said with false concern. "I hope everything is all right." "Everything's fine," Theodore replied curtly. "We were just discussing our next move." Victoria's smile was sharp as a blade. "Well, before you go, I simply must know more about Diana. She's been such an enigma all evening. Richard mentioned he thought he recognized you from somewhere, dear. Where was it you said you worked?" The question was delivered with surgical precision, designed to force Diana into either lying or revealing information that could be used against her. Theodore felt his anger rising at Victoria's obvious attempt to humiliate his guest. "Diana doesn't need to justify herself to anyone," Theodore said firmly. "And frankly, Victoria, I'm surprised by your behavior tonight. This is supposed to be a celebration, not an interrogation." Victoria's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing the calculating woman underneath. "I'm just making conversation, Theodore. No need to be so defensive. Unless there's something to hide." The challenge hung in the air between them, and Diana realized that this moment would define everything that followed. She could retreat, disappear back into the anonymity of the streets, and leave Theodore to his world of wealth and social position, or she could stand her ground and face whatever consequences came from her past. Looking at Theodore's protective stance and the genuine concern in his eyes, Diana made her choice. "There's nothing to hide," she said, her voice clear and strong. "But there are things that aren't anyone's business but my own." Victoria's eyes flashed with frustration at being denied the satisfaction of a public revelation. "Of course, dear. I was just curious about your background. After all, Theodore has such impeccable taste in companions." The backhanded compliment was designed to wound, but Diana smiled serenely. "Thank you. I think Theodore has excellent judgment as well. He certainly knew when to end an engagement that wasn't serving him." The directness of Diana's response left Victoria speechless for a moment, and Theodore had to suppress a smile at seeing his ex-fiancée outmaneuvered so elegantly. "Well," Victoria said, recovering her composure but clearly angry, "I hope you both have a lovely evening. Richard and I are about to cut the cake." As Victoria stalked away, Theodore turned to Diana with admiration and concern. "You were incredible, but are you sure you're ready for this?" "She's not going to let this go." Diana looked at him steadily. "I'm tired of running from my past, Theodore, and I'm tired of letting other people define my worth based on their assumptions and prejudices." "Good," Theodore said, taking her hand, "because I'd like to know more about the real Diana Martinez, the architect, the survivor, the woman who handles society vultures with more grace than they deserve." Diana's eyes widened in surprise. "You know who I am?" "I figured it out during dinner," Theodore admitted. "You mentioned helping people find their way home and the way you looked at the architecture of this place. I put the pieces together. I also did some research on my phone while you were in the ladies' room." Diana felt her heart sink. "Then you know about the accusations, the scandal." "I know about the charges that were dropped," Theodore said firmly. "I know about a brilliant woman who was betrayed by someone she trusted. And I know about someone who survived something that would have destroyed most people." The tears Diana had been holding back all evening finally began to fall. Not tears of shame or fear, but tears of relief at being truly seen and accepted for who she was, past and all. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you want to be associated with someone who comes with so much baggage?" Theodore's answer was simple and devastating in its honesty. Because in one evening, you've shown me more authenticity and courage than I've encountered in years of living in this artificial world. Because you've reminded me that there are things more important than appearances and social status. And because, he paused, struggling to find words for feelings that had developed with surprising speed and intensity. Because, Diana prompted, her heart racing. Because I think I'm falling in love with you, Theodore said quietly. And that terrifies and thrills me more than any business deal I've ever made. Diana stared at him, seeing the vulnerability in his confession and the sincerity in his eyes. Around them, the wedding reception continued with its elaborate performances of happiness and success, but in their small bubble of honesty, something real and beautiful was being born. Theodore, Diana began, but he held up a hand. You don't have to say anything right now, he said. I just wanted you to know that whatever comes next, you're not facing it alone anymore. As if, summoned by their moment of connection, Richard appeared beside them, his face wearing an expression of cold determination. I hope you're both enjoying the evening, he said pleasantly, but there was steel beneath his polite words. We are, thank you, Theodore replied, moving slightly closer to Diana in a protective gesture. Wonderful, Richard said. Diana, I was just telling some of the other guests about your fascinating career in architecture. Such innovative designs you created. Before that unfortunate business with the embezzlement charges. The words were delivered like a physical blow, designed to wound and humiliate. Around them, conversations quieted as people turned to listen, sensing drama in the making. But instead of retreating or denying the accusations, Diana stepped forward with a dignity that commanded respect. Yes, I was an architect. And yes, I was falsely accused of embezzlement by a business partner who was stealing from our clients. The charges were dropped when the truth came out, but by then the damage to my reputation was done. The honesty in her voice and the straightforward way she addressed the elephant in the room caught Richard off guard. He had expected denial or shame, not this calm acknowledgement of a difficult truth. I lost everything, Diana continued, her voice carrying to the entire room now. My career, my savings, my home. I've spent months living on the streets, learning lessons about survival and human nature that no architecture school ever taught me. But I've also learned about resilience, about the kindness of strangers, and about the difference between what truly matters and what only seems important. The ballroom had fallen completely silent, everyone hanging on her words. Victoria watched from across the room with a mixture of frustration and grudging respect. I'm not ashamed of where I've been or what I've endured, Diana said, looking directly at Richard. I'm proud that I survived. I'm proud that I never compromised my integrity, even when it would have been easier to take shortcuts. And I'm grateful for every experience that brought me to this moment, in this room, with this man. She turned to Theodore, her eyes shining with unshed tears and fierce determination, because sometimes the most beautiful things in life come from the most unexpected places. The applause started slowly, with Sarah clapping first, then spreading through the room as people responded to Diana's courage and authenticity. Even some of Victoria's friends, moved by the raw honesty of Diana's confession, joined in the applause. Richard's face was flushed with anger and embarrassment at having his cruel gambit backfire so spectacularly. Victoria looked stricken, realizing that her attempts to humiliate Theodore's companion had only made Diana more sympathetic and admirable in the eyes of their guests. Theodore took Diana's hand, his heart swelling with pride and love for this extraordinary woman who had just shown more courage in 5 minutes than he had displayed in years of careful social navigation. I think, he said loud enough for everyone to hear, that it's time for us to start our own celebration. As they began to make their way toward the exit, Theodore couldn't help but notice the way people looked at Diana now, not with pity or condescension, but with respect and admiration. She had transformed what was meant to be her moment of humiliation into a victory of the human spirit. But the biggest surprise was yet to come, and it would change everything Diana thought she knew about her past and her future. As Theodore and Diana reached the ballroom's exit, a distinguished elderly gentleman approached them with urgent steps. Theodore recognized him immediately. James Morrison, one of the city's most respected lawyers and a man known for his unwavering integrity. Miss Martinez, Morrison called out, slightly breathless. Please, I must speak with you. I've been searching for you for months. Diana turned, confused by the urgency in his voice. I'm sorry. Do we know each other? Morrison's eyes filled with a mixture of relief and regret. My dear child, I represented your former business partner, Marcus Brennan, in his criminal case. There's something you need to know. Something that changes everything. Theodore instinctively moved closer to Diana, sensing the importance of this moment. Around them, wedding guests continued their celebrations, oblivious to the drama unfolding near the exit. What could you possibly need to tell me? Diana asked, her voice guarded. The case is closed. Morrison shook his head gravely. The criminal case is closed, but the truth was never fully revealed. Marcus Brennan died 3 months ago from a heart attack. Before he passed, he made a full confession to clear his conscience. Diana felt the world shift around her. What kind of confession? He admitted to everything, Morrison continued, pulling out a sealed envelope from his jacket. The embezzlement, the forgery of your signature on the fraudulent contracts, the way he systematically destroyed your reputation to cover his tracks. He left detailed evidence and a written apology. Diana's hands trembled as she took the envelope. But why? Why are you telling me this now? Because he also left instructions for his estate. Marcus had invested the stolen money wisely over the years. His estate is worth considerably more than what he originally took. In his will, he left everything to you, as restitution for what he stole from you, both financially and personally. Theodore watched Diana's face go through a series of emotions, shock, disbelief, and something that might have been hope. The noise of the wedding reception seemed to fade into the background as the magnitude of Morrison's words sank in. How much? Diana whispered. Approximately $8 million, Morrison said quietly. Plus, he preserved all your original architectural designs and client testimonials. With his confession and the evidence he left behind, your reputation can be completely restored. Diana sank into a nearby chair, overwhelmed by the sudden reversal of fortune. Everything she had lost, her career, her financial security, her professional reputation, could potentially be restored with this revelation. But it was Theodore's reaction that surprised her most. Instead of excitement about her newfound wealth, he knelt beside her chair with concern etched on his face. Are you all right? He asked gently. This must be incredibly overwhelming. Diana looked at him with tears in her eyes. You don't seem surprised about the money. Theodore took her hands in his. Diana, I fell in love with a woman I met under a bus stop in the rain. Nothing about your financial situation changes how I feel about you, whether you have nothing or everything. His words were interrupted by a commotion behind them. Victoria had apparently overheard enough of the conversation to understand what was happening, and she was approaching with Richard close behind, both looking distinctly uncomfortable. Diana, Victoria said, her voice now lacking its earlier confidence, I owe you an apology. If you had known I was about to become wealthy, you would have treated me differently? Diana asked, standing to face her former tormentor. That says everything about your character, Victoria. Richard stepped forward, his face flushed with embarrassment. Perhaps we all got off on the wrong foot tonight. Diana, I hope you'll forgive my earlier misconceptions. Diana studied both of them with a calm that came from having survived much worse than their social cruelties. You know what I learned living on the streets? I learned that people reveal their true nature when they think you have nothing to offer them. Tonight you both showed me exactly who you are. She turned to Morrison. Mr. Morrison, I accept Marcus's bequest, not because I need his money to validate my worth, but because I can use it to help others who find themselves in situations like mine. Morrison smiled with approval. I think that's exactly what Marcus hoped you would do. He was deeply remorseful about the pain he caused you. As the lawyer departed with promises to handle all the legal paperwork, Diana found herself surrounded by many of the same people who had been cold to her earlier in the evening. Now they were eager to introduce themselves and express their admiration for her inspiring story. Diana accepted their attention graciously but without enthusiasm. She had learned to distinguish between genuine interest and opportunistic friendliness. Shall we leave? Theodore asked quietly, offering her his arm. Yes, Diana replied. I think I've had enough of this particular celebration. As they walked toward the exit, Victoria called out one last time. Diana, wait. They turned to see Victoria approaching alone, having left Richard behind with the other guests. For the first time that evening, she looked genuinely vulnerable. "I need to say something," Victoria began, her voice lacking its usual confidence. "Watching you tonight, the way you handled everything with such grace, it made me realize something about myself that I don't particularly like." Diana waited patiently for Victoria to continue. "I was cruel to you because I was threatened by you," Victoria admitted. "Not because of your circumstances, but because of who you are as a person. Theodore never looked at me the way he looks at you, and I think I always knew that what we had wasn't real love." It was perhaps the most honest thing Victoria had said all evening. "Thank you for saying that," Diana replied. "I hope you find real happiness in your marriage." Victoria nodded, tears threatening to fall. "I hope I deserve it." As they finally left the wedding reception, Theodore and Diana walked in comfortable silence toward his car. The night air was cool and fresh after the stifling atmosphere of the ballroom. "So," Theodore said, as they drove through the quiet city streets, "what happens now?" Diana considered the question seriously. "Now, I reclaim my life. I'll restart my architecture practice, but this time I'll focus on designing affordable housing and community centers. I want to create spaces that bring people together rather than divide them." "And us?" Theodore asked quietly. Diana turned to look at him, this man who had shown her kindness when she had nothing and love when she thought herself unlovable. "I'd like to find out what us could become, but I need to rebuild myself first, not financially but emotionally. I need to remember who I am when I'm not just surviving." Theodore nodded, understanding the wisdom in her words. "I'd like to be part of that journey if you'll have me." "I'd like that too," Diana said, reaching over to take his hand. 6 months later, Diana's new architecture firm was thriving. Her first project, a community center in the neighborhood where she had once lived on the streets, was nearing completion. The building was designed to provide services for homeless individuals while also serving as a gathering place for the entire community. Theodore had become not just her romantic partner, but also her business partner, using his financial expertise to help her firm grow responsibly. Together, they had created something neither could have achieved alone. The community center's grand opening was attended by hundreds of people, including many who had once dismissed Diana based on her circumstances. But the guest list also included Sarah, the kind woman from the wedding who had become a true friend, and Morrison, who had helped Diana navigate the legal complexities of her restored reputation. Notably absent were Victoria and Richard, whose marriage had ended in a messy divorce just 3 months after their elaborate wedding. As Diana cut the ribbon on the new building, she looked out at the crowd and saw faces of every social and economic background united in celebration of something positive. This was what architecture was meant to do: bring people together and create spaces where human dignity could flourish. That evening, as she and Theodore sat on the roof garden of her new building, looking out over the city lights, Diana reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. "Do you ever regret it?" Theodore asked. "The months on the streets, everything you went through?" Diana considered the question carefully. "I regret the pain and the fear," she said finally, "but I don't regret the lessons. I learned that kindness exists in the most unexpected places. I learned that dignity isn't something that can be taken from you. It's something you choose to maintain. And I learned that sometimes losing everything is the only way to discover what truly matters." Theodore pulled her closer, marveling at the strength and wisdom of this remarkable woman. "What matters most?" Diana smiled, thinking of all the people who would benefit from the building below them, of the second chances and new beginnings that were possible when people chose compassion over judgment. "Connection," she said simply. "Real, authentic human connection. Everything else is just decoration." As if to prove her point, Theodore leaned down and kissed her under the starlit sky, surrounded by the beautiful building she had designed and the community they had helped create together. It had taken a homeless woman and a lonely millionaire to show each other what true wealth really meant, and in finding each other, they had discovered that the most precious things in life couldn't be bought, sold, or stolen. They could only be freely given and gratefully received. Their love story had begun with a chance encounter in the rain, but it would continue to grow and flourish like the gardens Diana designed, carefully tended, deeply rooted, and beautiful enough to inspire everyone who encountered it. Thank you for watching today's story. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to give it a big thumbs up, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel to relive the magic of the 80s every day with our heartfelt stories. May God bless you and your family, and don't forget to click on the video popping up on the screen right now. It's another totally rad story you won't want to miss. See you in the next video, and stay awesome.